I must just say, most inauguration days in history, and even Trump's first term, there were very much a day of celebration. You have the formal ceremony, the transition
Right.
of power, which is always nice. But regardless of what you think about Trump, the guy's got some stamina, man. He had his inauguration, and then he went right to work signing these orders, and then doing these videos. For us being people in the housing industry, we want to know naturally, what is the new administration, any new administration, going to do with regards to housing. And so I think it would be helpful to start the conversation by what is actually in the executive order and how that may affect housing prices. So basically what Trump said was in the order that he's got a committee that he's going to form, and that committee is to find ways to cut regulations and cut prices, and then report back to him every 30 days and then make changes from there. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and so basically what he's saying is that regulation has cost each family somewhere $50,000
Right.
per family, and I don't know where he gets these statistics. I mean, as they say, 100% of what you read on the internet is true. That was Abe Lincoln's quote. Is that 100% of what you believe in the internet is true. But I mean, he's done some research, and that's what he figures it's costing. So his aim is to get rid of that. And the committee is made up of department heads from different departments that manage, housing or finance or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think the quickest way to cut costs would be the regulatory route. And I think we mostly are talking about new construction builds here, because you can't just knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, you looking to sell? And by the way, whatever you thought your house was worth, you now have to cut that price by 25%. That's definitely not what this executive order says. It's an effort to bring down pricing, and you do that through making it less expensive for the new construction builders like your D.R. Hortons, your Lennars, and then your smaller local builders, to where they can actually make a house that's ready for a family to move in at a lesser cost than it is costing them right now, given all the regulation.
Let's talk about the resale market for just a second.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got John and Jane homeowner and they're selling their house for $400,000,
Right.
and you go and say, hey, you got to sell it for $300 because Trump said so.
Right.
That's probably not going to go well, number one.
Exactly.
Everybody's trying to make as much money on their house as possible because they need it for the next house or whatever the case may be, right? And what if they owe $350,000 on their mortgage? Like, that obviously would not work.
Exactly.
Right. But you're right. It is focused mostly on regulations for the builders that they're up against. So new construction is where that kind of goes.
Yeah, and I think as far as looking at that regulation, you're looking at environmental regulations. So trying to cut things there that make sense.
Right.
Structural engineering type regulations. And obviously you want to create a safe house that somebody can move into and they're not going to have a bunch of problems with it, but finding that balance between over-regulating the builders to death and, doing what actually makes sense. And then, obviously the third thing is that I think Trump, and it wasn't really covered in this executive order, but he's made it very clear that he wants to put pressure on Jerome Powell to lower interest rates, which would be the other caveat to this. You cut the regulation by X percentage and the environmental and the other things that you can regulate, and then you put pressure on the Fed to reduce the federal funds rate so that hopefully mortgage rates can ease a little bit.
Exactly. And we talked about some examples,
Right.
Of kind of what we're talking about. Our town that we live in is notorious for being difficult to build in. I was talking to a banker buddy of mine the other day, and we have a client, or he has a client that's a mutual friend, and they've owned the same property for 6 years now, and they've been trying to get a permit to build their house.
Yeah.
That entire time. All 6 years, the city found some bayou that, now we need to have an easement if they ever needed to go back there. And it's just been ridiculous. And they've spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 on an attorney to get this thing to happen. It still hasn't happened.
Yeah, and I mean that's completely unreasonable, and it's
ridiculous.
And we're in Texas, for those that don't know, and if you watched our show enough, we're from Texas, but maybe we got some newbies listening today. Yeah. So, California, I could only imagine. New York is, if we're dealing with that type of regulation here, what they must be dealing with there. So I would love to see. Obviously, we don't want to see builders cutting corners and providing a crappy product for people that are buying
No.
their houses. But if there was a way to make it make more sense, that would certainly be better for the buyer and the overall
And you're
experience.
telling me about a builder and a pipeline issue?
Yeah, so on the west side of League City here, I was talking to a builder. I put a new home build. It was a D.R. Horton home under contract last week. And the builder, it's a massive neighborhood. So school districts are everything here in Texas. And, League City, Clear Creek ISD is more sought after, let's just say, than Santa Fe ISD. But this particular neighborhood is so vast that it's going to encompass both school districts.
Yeah.
So I wanted to basically make sure that my clients were buying a home that was within the school district that they wanted to be in. And so the representative for D.R. Horton said to me, "Oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. We haven't even started work on the Santa Fe side yet. And that is because there's a pipeline that runs underneath the neighborhood. And if we were to, move our building materials to the other side of the neighborhood right now, we would be charged a fine of $1 million a day because we would have to shut the pipeline down." Now, where do you think that $1 million a day that D.R. Horton is incurring is going to go? It's going to be spread out right across the prices of those homes.
Right.
And from what he was explaining to me, the pipeline runs well underground. There's absolutely no reason to have to shut that off just for this, the materials to be moved over and the trucks and all of that. That is a true example of overregulation that would directly impact pricing. So I think that's what Trump is after. And I think if certain things like that can be reduced, I think that would be a net positive.
Well, I think it's positive, but I mean, we just have to, face facts here. Builders are selling commodity houses.
Right.
They're going to make as much money as they can. And so let's say that we do reduce the cost by 25%. Do you think that's going to really transfer into 25% price reductions? Probably not. I mean, I've not found a builder yet that is a 501c3 charitable organization. I mean, they're there to make a profit, and that's what that's just it. And so, they might pass some of that on, or it might give them some margin to offer some better rates or some better this or that, keep people employed. That's always good, but I'm not sure it's going to be a 25% discount.
Yeah, and so I see what you're saying, but I do think it can lower costs overall for the consumer, and I'll tell you why. It's because most of these master plan communities have somewhere between 5 and 10 builders all vying for the same business. People that want to live in that area, they're going to shop around. They're going to go see what each builder's offering as far as interest rates, what sort of credits towards the closing are they offering, what are the sales prices of the homes per, what's the price per square foot. And so if all of a sudden these regulatory changes do take effect and it makes things cheaper for the builders, yes, they may try to make that bigger spread initially, but all it takes is for one of those builders to say, "Hey, you know what, we can really eat the other 5 guys' lunch by lowering just a little bit. We're still making margin. We're still profitable because of the regulatory cuts." And then they start putting all the homes under contract for a month or two. And then the beautiful thing about capitalism is you have competition. And when you've got competition, it tends to work out in the favor of the consumer, which in this case would be the buyer. So to answer your question, I don't think it will lower by 25%. But I could see maybe a 5 to 10% decrease. I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes some sense. I think, that for competition's sake, they'll do that.
Right.
But not all of that savings is going to be passed on to the consumer. I hate to say it, because it's still a capitalist nation, know. And the thing to remember about Trump, and he is a polarizing figure. There's people that love him. There's people that hate him.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Trump is a business leader. He is leading a business, the United States government.
Right.
And so, you got to keep in mind that his executive order here, it's more of a mission statement.
Right.
This is what we want to do. We want to reduce this by 25%. Will we get there? Probably not. I mean, there's so much other things that have to go on. I mean, yes, the Republicans have a majority in the Senate and House, and that's great, but it's a slim majority.
Right.
It's not an overwhelming majority where everything's guaranteed to pass. He'll face opposition in getting things done, but he's inspiring the troops.
Right.
He's leading the troops into battle saying, "Hey, we want to cut 25%. And that's awesome. if it leads us to 10% even reduction, then that's a good thing.
Yeah. And one of the things I think, truthfully, should be really a bipartisan issue is trying to get homes more in line with the average income. Because when you look back, 20, 30 years ago, what the average income was versus what the average home price was as compared to today, there is a disparity there. And I have helped many, many clients over my career, and I have helped people from both sides of the aisle, and I have helped people at the extremes of both sides of the aisle.
Yes.
And you know what? My mission is always the same. It's to get them into a house. And you know what? Regardless of who you voted for, every single one of my clients has wanted me to negotiate them the best deal possible for them. So I think we can agree that maybe getting housing prices more in order should be kind of a bipartisan thing, right? Wouldn't you think?
It sure would. And I mean, kind of in the same vein, I've never had a customer call me and say, you know what, give me the highest rate you got. That just never happes.
You got any of those 10% interest rates lying around?
10, 15 if you can. Charge me a bunch of discount points and all that to get it. It never happens. Everybody's trying to time the bottom of the market. In this case, what we're talking about is a price. They're trying to time the bottom of the price market. They're trying to time the bottom of the rate market.
Yep.
And the thing about the bottom is you usually don't know it was the bottom until long after.
Exactly.
You don't know you're in the bottom until the bottom. And so, kind of the overarching theme still goes like, maybe we'll see some reduction in the increase in prices over time.
Yeah.
And that would be good. That would help families.
Right.
Totally makes sense. But should you hang out and wait until it all comes to fruition? Probably not.
Probably not. And I mean, the reality is, let's say you bought a house in 2007, right before the crash, but you just held on to it. You paid your mortgage. You're in the money right now.
Yeah.
I have a friend in the business who said, every real estate transaction is a good transaction if you live long enough. So, maybe the market takes a dip and, if you own the house 50 years later, it's going to be worth more than you paid for it and you will make money on it. So, another famous quote is, and it's more of a quote for the stock market rather than the real estate market, but I think it applies here too. Time in the market always trumps timing the market.
Right.
So, we'd love to see house prices drop. How will we know when we hit the bottom? We won't know till after the fact when we see prices go back up. So sitting around waiting for the bottom is a tough proposition. But I guess my final question to you is, and guys, just before we finish up this conversation, we noticed that the majority of you that are watching these videos aren't subscribed to the channel.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Guys, if you're getting value out of these videos and you're enjoying our content, a subscribe to the channel helps us out tremendously, and it allows you to see our videos when we drop them. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Thank you.
How effective do you think Trump's going to be with this executive order? Because I think we both kind of agree 25% reduction in the price of housing is going to be a tough thing to achieve.
Yeah.
But I also think we can both agree that everybody'd be happy if we got to 8 or 10, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that people need to keep in mind is that, this reduction, we're not going to see a drop in values. We're not going to see the houses all of a sudden worth 25% or even 10% less.
Right.
Right? Because keep in mind, Trump is a real estate investor himself.
Right, sure.
Right? So he surely doesn't want that either. But it would slow the progression of the increases in pricing.
Right.
That, and that would be an excellent thing. I think, somewhere in the 5 to 10% range, we're probably doing good. And he's set up for more success than he was the last time around. And the great thing about this Trump presidency is that we've already had one, so we know what to expect.
Right.
And he knows what he's doing. His goal is now just to get it to happen faster this time around and make the best use of his time for what he and others feel like is a good thing.
Yeah.
So, I think if he reaches 5 to 10%, I'm going to call it a win.
Yeah, and I would love to see that, and then maybe some downward movement in the mortgage rates. I think that would really start to get things churning. But I think he's got a reasonable shot at this. I think that, it should be a bipartisan thing. I think everybody, regardless of where you live or what side of the aisle you're on, you're hoping for lower prices in housing and lower prices across the board. And a lot of people don't realize that, a lot of these other executive orders were pertaining to energy and things of that nature. And, Does the price of gas in Miami affect the average home cost in Iowa? In an indirect way, I mean, everything is connected. The market is both very simple and very complex at the same time. And so I think, you know, an overall reduction in the expenses for the average American family, regardless of who you voted for, is going to be a good thing. So I never wish an incoming president to fail, regardless of who gets elected. And I certainly don't for Trump. I hope that this is a roaring success. And, you know, for you and I both in the industry, I think we'd love to see some price reduction and some downward movement in those rates.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.